In this video, I'm going to show you what a breaker block is and how you can use it with other kinds of PD arrays. In a bullish example, we want to see a low form, and then we want to see a high, and after that high, we want to see a lower low going lower than the recent low we created right here, and after that, we want to see a higher high distributing higher than the recent high. So right here, this would be a breaker. So we have our low, high, lower low, higher high, and then we want to see price going down into this recent high we created, and that is our breaker model. It's used to clear things up from this low to this high. This is our breaker range. So this range right here, we want to see price going down into and then distribute higher. Something that you want to add to your notes is if you don't make a lower low from the low high range, as you see, if we don't make this low low, we can't be anticipating a breaker model. It's also the same with the higher high, because if we don't form a higher high from the lower low, we also couldn't anticipate a breaker model. So now that we have formed a higher high, we want to see price going down into this breaker range right here, and then distribute higher. Something that I like to see when we have formed a breaker is a PD array that combines with that breaker we just formed. So let's say we have a fair value gap right here, and that fair value gap combines with our breaker model. So that's what I personally like to see when we have formed a breaker. A bearish example would look something like this, where we have a high, low, higher high, lower low. And something that I like to see is when we form a higher high, I want to see price both taking out the high we recently created and also a kind of buy side liquidity. Because then there's two levels of liquidity that will support price in going lower. There's also two places that you can use standard deviations, and that's either from the high to the low, and then we would be targeting either the -1 to -1.5 range or the -2 to -2.5 range. Just to clear things up, we would use standard deviations from the high to the low, or the breaker range or the breaker block. And if we were bullish, we would use standard deviations from the low up to the high, as I said before, in the breaker range, or if it's a breaker block, then on the breaker block. Now that we know the basics of what a breaker is, we can go into the charts and find some examples. So for our first example, we have created a low, high. So now we want to see price creating a lower low and taking out both the recent low we just created and also this sell side liquidity down here. So right here, we take out the recent low we just created and this low right here. So now we want to see price creating a higher high going above this high right here. So right here, we go above this high. So this range right here, these two setups up close candles would be our breaker. When using a breaker, you can also just use one up close candle, but in this example, I'm just going to use both of them. So now that we have found our breaker range, we want to see if we can find any form of PD array in this breaker. And as you see right here, we have a fair value gap that we could use to combine with the breaker. So now let's see what happens. So right here, we touch the breaker with the fair value gap. So now we can use standard deviations on the breaker range to anticipate where price wants to go. From this low down here to this high. And now let's just go for the -1 to -1.5 range. So right here we come down into the breaker again. And right here we take out these highs. And we also took out the -1 to -1.5 range. So now let's see if we can go all the way up to -2 to -2.5 range. Right here we tap into the breaker again. And go all the way up to the -2 to -2.5 range. Just to clear things up, you can see we have our breaker right here, because we make a low, high, and then a lower low, taking out both the low we created and sell-side liquidity. And then we make a high high all the way up to -2 to -2.5 range. And as you see, within our breaker, we make a fair value gap that combines with the breaker. So that would be our PD array. And you could also use one candle to use as your breaker. And even if you were to use that one candle as your breaker, it will still work out perfectly. So now to the standard deviations. As you see, from the low to the high, we came up and touched the -1 range, also -1.5 range, the -2 range, and the -2.5 range. And as you see, at the -1 to -1.5 range, we came down into this fair value gap, and then went all the way up to the -2 to -2.5 range. You could also use your standard deviations from the lower low to the high, as you see right here. And then we came up touching the -1 to -1.5 range. So let's see if we can go up touching the -2 to -2.5 range. And right here we came all the way up touching the -4 range. So this would be our higher high. For the next example, we have made a high, low. So now we want to see a higher high going higher than the recent high we made, and all the way up to, let's say, this buy-side liquidity. So let's see what happens. So right here, we go higher than the recent high and this buy-side liquidity. So this would be our higher high. So now that we have touched these two levels of liquidity, we want to see price going lower than this low we made. And right here, we make a lower low, going lower than this low. So now that we have made a lower low, we can mark out the breaker range. And as you see from this down close candle, all the way down to the low, this is our breaker. So now that we know where our breaker is, we can go down into a lower time frame and maybe find a more precise breaker. So right here we're on the 1 hour. So let's go down into the 15 minute. And as you see, this is our breaker range, and we have one up close candle in this breaker range. So we can just move this breaker from this high all the way down to this low, and even just use this one down close candle as our breaker block. So let's see if we can go up and touch this breaker block. Right here we touch our breaker block. So now we could also use standard deviations to anticipate where price wants to go from this high to this low, and find out that we have sell-side liquidity that aligns with the -1 range, as you see right here. So that will be our target. So let's see what happens. And right here we come down and take out the sell side liquidity. Just to clear things up, you can see on the 1 hour, this is our breaker right here. Then we go all the way down into the 15-minute and get a better view of our breaker model and find a breaker block right here that price perfectly reacts to, and going all the way down to the sell side liquidity, where our -1 standard deviations are from this high to this low, that aligns with the sell side liquidity. Also, if you didn't notice, we have a breaker right here that aligns with our breaker block right over here. As you see, we have a high, low, higher high, lower low. And this breaker range right here, you can see we just came up and touched it with this SIBI, sell side imbalance, buy side inefficiency, you see right here. So this could be a high probability trade entry. Just to show you that you could also use your standard deviations on the 1 hour, we go from the high to the low, and then we want to see price coming down into this -1 to -1.5 range. And right here we gap lower and touch the -1 to -1.5 range. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and if there's anything you didn't understand, just comment down below.